I am Dominique, 32 years old, and for the last 6 months, I have been living inside a fog so thick I could barely remember my own name. My husband Darnell calls it his special vitamin blend designed to help with my anxiety, but I call it the reason I have lost half a year of my life. The clock on the nightstand read 2:15 in the morning when Darnell finally sat up in bed. I felt the mattress shift under his weight. I kept my eyes shut and forced my breathing to remain shallow and even. The bitter metallic taste of the blue pill was burning a hole under my tongue. He had watched me put it in my mouth an hour ago, but he did not know I had mastered the art of hiding it beneath my tongue until the coating began to dissolve. Darnell leaned over me, and his breath smelled of mint and betrayal. He whispered my name once, but I did not move. Satisfied that I was deep in a chemically induced slumber, he slid out of the Egyptian cotton sheets and padded barefoot out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the potted fern in the corner. I spat out the half-dissolved pill and wiped the blue residue from my mouth with the back of my hand. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed to know where he was going. I crept out into the hallway of the colonial mansion my grandmother had left me. The house used to feel warm and full of love, but lately the shadows seemed to stretch longer and the floorboards felt colder beneath my feet. I moved silently toward the staircase. Faint light spilled from the living room down below. I gripped the banister to steady my trembling hands. I expected to hear the hushed whispers of a mistress, or perhaps a bookie collecting a gambling debt. What I heard was far worse. I heard the voice of my sister-in-law Ashley, and the distinct commanding tone of my mother-in-law Mama Patrice. Darnell was not on the phone, he was on a video call. I crouched on the landing just out of sight and peered through the railing. Darnell was pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace holding his tablet. On the screen I saw Ashley wearing her nurse scrubs and Mama Patrice sitting in her kitchen counting a stack of cash. Darnell ran a hand over his face and said, "She is still lucid, Ashley. The dose is not working fast enough." She asked me about the bank accounts again today. I froze. The blood in my veins turned to ice. Ashley laughed on the screen, a cold, clinical sound that made my skin crawl. "She is building a tolerance, Darnell. You have to double the sedative at breakfast. We need her completely incoherent by Friday if you want that power of attorney signed." Mama Patrice chimed in without looking up from her money. "Just do what she says, son. We have waited too long for that house. Fix it." Before I continue this story and tell you how I stopped myself from screaming, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight a battle within your own home. Discovering that the man I shared my bed with was poisoning me was only the beginning. I realized in that moment that my illness was not a tragedy, it was a heist. I turned around and crawled back to my bedroom, knowing that when the sun rose, the war for my life would truly begin. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of the colonial mansion that had been in my family for 3 generations. Usually, the morning light felt like needles in my eyes, a side effect of the heavy sedation Darnell had kept me under for months. But today the light was crisp and revealing. I paused in the hallway and took a deep breath. My mind was finally clear. The fog had lifted just enough for me to see the battlefield. I could smell bacon frying and hear the aggressive whir of the Vitamix blender. To anyone else, it would sound like a loving husband making breakfast. To me, it sounded like a chemist preparing a lethal injection. I forced my shoulders to slump and adjusted my robe to look disheveled. I had to play the part of the confused invalid wife. If Darnell suspected for even a second that I was lucid, he would find another way to silence me before Friday. I shuffled into the kitchen, dragging my feet against the hardwood floor. Darnell was standing by the marble island wearing his pristine white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked every bit the successful real estate mogul he pretended to be. He turned when he saw me and flashed that $1,000,000 smile that had once charmed my grandmother into signing over the deed to this house. Good morning, Sleeping Beauty, he said, his voice dripping with synthetic honey. You slept late. I was getting worried. He poured a thick green liquid from the blender into a tall glass. The sludge frothed at the top. It smelled of kale and ginger, but I knew beneath the health food facade lay a crushed cocktail of antipsychotics and sedatives. Here you go, baby. Drink this before you eat, he said, sliding the glass across the counter toward me. It is the new recipe Dr. Evans suggested for your nerves. I stared at the glass. My throat was parched, but the thought of swallowing that poison made my stomach churn. I reached for it, my hand trembling. The tremble was real. It was rage, not weakness, but Darnell interpreted it as another symptom of my decline. He watched me with the intense predatory focus of a hawk circling a field mouse. He was not looking at me with love, he was checking to see if his investment was behaving. I lifted the glass halfway to my lips. I saw his Adam apple bob as he swallowed in anticipation. He needed me to take that first sip. He needed me pliable and confused for the meeting with the notary. I cannot drink it, Darnell, I whispered, letting my voice crack. I feel sick. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. You have to drink it, Dom, he said, his tone hardening just enough to be a warning. Do not be difficult. It is for your own good. I brought the glass closer to my mouth, and then I made my move. I let my fingers go limp. The heavy crystal glass slipped from my grip and crashed onto the marble floor. Green sludge exploded everywhere, splashing onto the white cabinets and Darnell's expensive Italian leather shoes. For exactly 1 second, the mask dropped. Darnell did not look concerned. He looked murderous. His eyes went wide and his lip curled back in a snarl of pure animalistic fury. You stupid cow, he hissed. The venom in his voice was so shocking, it almost made me step back. He looked at the wasted liquid on the floor like I had just spilled liquid gold. Then, as quickly as the rage appeared, it vanished. He blinked, and the loving husband returned. Oh my God, Dom, are you okay? I am so sorry, I did not mean to yell. He rushed over to me, stepping right in the mess, but I had seen it. I had seen the monster living beneath his skin, and I knew I had just declared war. The heavy oak front door slammed shut, echoing through the empty foyer like a gunshot. I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, holding my breath until the growl of Darnell Jaguar faded down the long driveway. Only then did I allow my shoulders to drop. The silence that filled the house was sudden and overwhelming. For the first time in 6 months, I was alone and my mind was not swimming in a haze of chemically induced cotton. I tried to take a step toward the living room, but my knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the granite counter to keep from collapsing. My legs trembled, not from fear this time, but from atrophy. I looked down at my arms. They were thin, too thin. The definition I had earned from years of kickboxing was gone, replaced by soft, pale skin that looked like it belonged to a ghost. I was 32 years old, but I felt like an octogenarian in a nursing home. I dragged myself to the home office, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor. I needed to see a calendar. I needed to orient myself in time. I found my leather-bound planner buried under a stack of Darnell real estate contracts. I flipped it open. The pages for September were blank. The pages for October were filled with Darnell handwriting, not mine. Dom had a bad episode, he had written on the 10th. Dom was aggressive, he wrote on the 12th. Dom did not recognize me on the 15th. I stared at the lies written in his elegant script. I had no memory of these days, just black holes where my life used to be. Panic began to rise in my throat, hot and acidic. Was he right? Was I actually losing my mind? For months, Darnell had been whispering the same story into my ear while I drifted in and out of consciousness. It is your father blood, Dominique, he would say, stroking my hair while I lay paralyzed in bed. He had schizophrenia too, remember. It skips a generation, but it came for you early. I had started to believe him. I had started to believe that the shadows I saw were hallucinations, and not just the side effects of the pills. I questioned my own reality. I questioned my own name. But standing there in the sunlit office with the fog lifting, I remembered my father. I remembered a brilliant, eccentric artist who suffered from depression, not psychosis. He never forgot who I was. He never lost time. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. This was the gaslight. This was the narrative Darnell was building brick by brick to bury me alive. He was not just stealing my money, he was stealing my history, my genetics, and my sanity. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the computer. My hair was matted and my eyes were sunken, but the woman staring back was not crazy. She was angry. I was not sick, I was being erased. And if I wanted to survive, I had to stop shaking and start thinking like the forensic accountant I used to be before I became Darnell Broken Doll. I closed the planner and took a deep breath. I had 6 hours before he came home. I had 6 hours to find the truth behind the lies. The double mahogany doors of Darnell's office were locked. In the 5 years we had been married, he had never locked this room. It was another sign that the dynamic of our household had shifted from a partnership to a prison. I stood in the hallway clutching a paperclip I had straightened out from the junk drawer. Most people think forensic accounting is just about spreadsheets and tax codes. They do not realize it is about understanding how people hide things. I had spent a decade tracking embezzlers and fraudsters who thought they were smarter than the system. I knew that people who hide secrets always leave a physical trail. I knelt down and inserted the makeshift pick into the lock. My hands, which had been shaking earlier, were now steady with adrenaline. I felt the tumblers click into place one by one. With a soft snap, the lock disengaged. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room smelled of expensive leather and the sandalwood cologne Darnell wore to mask the scent of his infidelity. I did not waste time looking at the family photos on the wall where Darnell smiled like a shark next to a sedated version of me. I went straight to the filing cabinet behind his desk. It was locked, of course, but Darnell was arrogant. He was the kind of man who used his birthday as his PIN code. I tried 0412 on the keypad. The light turned green. I almost laughed out loud at his predictability. He thought I was too broken to remember his birthday, let alone break into his files. I rifled through the hanging folders, ignoring the ones labeled taxes and investments. I needed to know what they were planning for Friday. Towards the back, tucked behind a file on property maintenance, I found a manila folder with no label. I pulled it out and opened it on the desk. My breath caught in my throat. It was a medical file. My medical file. But none of this was real. The header read, St. Jude Psychiatric Center, the private hospital where Ashley worked. The diagnosis jumped off the page in bold letters: early onset paranoid schizophrenia with acute violent tendencies. I flipped through the pages. There were observation notes detailing incidents that never happened. November 3rd, patient attempted to set fire to drapes. November 10th, patient threatened staff with a kitchen knife. It was a work of fiction designed to paint me as a monster. My eyes dropped to the bottom of the page. It was signed by Dr. Marcus Evans. I stared at the signature. The loops on the letters were distinctively large and the slant was aggressive. I had seen this handwriting on Christmas cards and passive-aggressive sticky notes for years. This was not Dr. Evans' signature. This was Ashley handwriting. She had forged a doctor's signature to institutionalize me. This was not just betrayal anymore. This was a felony. I pulled out my burner phone and began photographing every single page. I had the smoking gun, but I knew I needed more than just paper to take them down. I needed the weapon. I had the paperwork, but I needed the weapon. In a court of law, a forged signature is fraud, but a stash of illegal narcotics is a felony that carries a prison sentence. I scanned the room looking for a hiding place that Darnell would consider clever. He was a creature of habit and vanity. My eyes landed on his Titleist golf bag leaning against the mahogany bookcase. Darnell claimed to play every Sunday with his investors, but I noticed the leather on the strap was pristine and the clubs were free of grass stains. He would not let the cleaning lady touch it, claiming the equipment was too sensitive. It was the perfect Trojan horse. I knelt beside the bag and unzipped the main compartment. It smelled of stale air and rubber. I dug my hand past the drivers and the irons, feeling around the lining. Nothing. I tried the side pockets where he kept his teas and extra balls. Still nothing. Panic began to prick at the back of my neck. I knew they were here. I knew it. I ran my fingers along the bottom seam of the ball pocket and felt a small, hard lump. There was a false bottom. I used my fingernail to pry at the stitching until I found the hidden Velcro tab. I ripped it open and pulled out a black velvet drawstring pouch. It was heavy. My hands trembled as I loosened the strings and dumped the contents onto the Persian rug. 3 orange prescription bottles rolled out. None of them had labels. I picked up the first bottle. Inside were the blue pills he had been feeding me. I picked up the second. It contained white oblong tablets. I grabbed my burner phone again and opened the browser. I typed in the imprint code from the white pill. The search results loaded instantly, and the air left my lungs as if I had been punched in the gut. The screen read Ace Promazine. Veterinary use only. It was a sedative used to tranquilize horses before surgery. I gagged. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream of pure horror. He was not just drugging me, he was treating me like livestock. I typed in the code for the blue pill. Haloperidol. A high-potency antipsychotic used to treat severe schizophrenia and acute mania. Side effects included confusion, memory loss, tremors, and muscle stiffness. Everything I had been feeling for the last 6 months suddenly made sense. The brain fog, the shaking hands, the inability to form a sentence. I was not sick. I was being chemically lobotomized. I sat there on the floor surrounded by the tools of my destruction. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of clarity. Darnell looked at me every morning, kissed my forehead, and then fed me poison designed to break my mind. He watched me stumble and slur my words, and he probably laughed about it with Ashley. I looked at the bottles one last time. I wanted to smash them. I wanted to flush them down the toilet. But I was a forensic accountant, and I knew that evidence was the only currency that mattered. I carefully put the pills back into the bottles and slid them back into the velvet pouch. I returned the pouch to the false bottom of the golf bag and pressed the Velcro shut. I stood up and wiped my face. The terrified wife was gone. The woman who stood up was a cold, calculated hunter, and I was about to turn the tables. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, signaling the start of what would be the longest dinner of my life. I had spent the afternoon practicing my blank stare in the mirror, trying to mask the sharp clarity that had returned to my mind. When the doorbell rang, I forced my body to slump slightly and opened the door. Ashley stood there wearing a dress that cost more than my first car and holding a bottle of cheap wine. She breezed past me without a greeting, her perfume filling the foyer with a cloying scent of vanilla and entitlement. Behind her trailed Darnell's younger brother, Terrence, who could not even look me in the eye. He mumbled a hello and hurried to the living room, leaving me standing alone in the doorway of my own home. We sat in the formal dining room under the crystal chandelier that my grandmother had loved. The table was set with the good china, but the atmosphere was toxic. Darnell sat at the head of the table playing the role of the devoted, exhausted husband, while Ashley picked at her food and watched me with the predatory gaze of a hawk. I concentrated on cutting my roast chicken into tiny, precise squares, trying to keep my hands from trembling with rage. Every sound in the room seemed amplified, the clinking of silverware, the pouring of wine, the heavy silence that hung over us like a shroud. So Dominique, Ashley said suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. I wanted to thank you again for being so generous. I went ahead and told the contractor to start on the pool house renovation this morning. I paused, my knife hovering over my plate. I looked up to see Ashley smiling at me, a smile that did not reach her cold blue eyes. What are you talking about, Ashley? I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. Ashley let out a dramatic sigh and looked at Darnell. See, I told you she would forget. She turned back to me, speaking slowly as if I were a toddler. The loan, Dominique. The $50,000 you promised me yesterday. You said you wanted to fund the renovation as a thank you for all the help I have given you with your treatments. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had not spoken to Ashley in 2 weeks. This was a trap, a blatant lie designed to test my mental state in front of witnesses. Ashley, I said firmly, I did not speak to you yesterday. I did not promise you any money. Darnell reached across the table and covered my hand with his damp palm. Honey, he said, his voice dripping with fake concern. You did. You called her from the garden. I was standing right there. Do you really not remember? I looked at Terrence, hoping for some sign of truth, but he just stared at his mashed potatoes, unwilling to go against his brother. I realized then that I was completely isolated. If I argued, I would look aggressive and paranoid. If I agreed, I would be admitting that my memory was gone. It was a perfect lose-lose situation, orchestrated by the people who were supposed to love me. I pulled my hand away from Darnell. I must be tired, I whispered, lowering my head to hide the fire in my eyes. I do not remember. Ashley clapped her hands together lightly. It is okay, sweetie, she said, taking a sip of wine. That is why we are all here. To handle the details you can no longer manage, we will just have Darnell sign the check for you. I gripped my napkin under the table. They were looting my life right in front of my face and daring me to scream. I knew that arguing with a table full of liars was a waste of breath. If I wanted to survive this dinner, I needed something stronger than my memory. I needed proof. I slowly slid my hand into the pocket of my silk dress and felt the cold metal of my phone. I pressed the side button 3 times, a shortcut I had set up years ago to start a voice recording without looking. I placed the phone face down on the tablecloth next to my water glass, hoping the microphone would pick up their lies. I cleared my throat and looked directly at Ashley. I want to be clear, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I did not agree to any loan. If you need money, ask Darnell, but leave my trust fund out of it. From the other end of the table, Mama Patrice finally spoke. She had been watching me with the intensity of a sniper since she sat down. Her large diamond rings glittered under the chandelier as she reached for the breadbasket. You are making a scene, Dominique, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You are upsetting the digestion of everyone at this table. Suddenly her hand shot out. It happened so fast that if I had blinked I would have missed it. She did not reach for the bread. She swiped her hand sideways in a sharp, violent arc. Her heavy gold bracelet caught my phone, sending it flying across the table. It landed with a sickening splash directly into the center of the steaming tureen of lobster bisque. Hot soup splattered onto the white tablecloth and onto my chest. I gasped and jumped up, knocking my chair back. My phone, my lifeline to the outside world, sank to the bottom of the creamy orange liquid. Oh, Lord, have mercy, Mama Patrice cried out, pressing a hand to her chest in mock surprise. Look what you made me do, Dominique. Why did you put your phone right in the way of the bread? You are so jumpy tonight. I stared at the tureen. I reached for a spoon to fish it out, but Darnell grabbed my wrist. His grip was bruising. Stop it, he hissed. You are embarrassing me. Sit down. But my phone, I stammered. It is ruined, Darnell said, letting go of my arm with a look of pure disgust. Just like you ruined this dinner. Honestly, Dom, I cannot take you anywhere anymore. Look at you. You are a mess. I looked around the table. Ashley was hiding a smirk behind her napkin. Terrence was staring at his shoes. Mama Patrice was calmly buttering a roll, as if she had not just destroyed my property. In that moment, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This was not just greed. This was a coordinated siege. They were not just trying to steal my money, they were trying to provoke me into a reaction that would justify locking me away. If I screamed, they would call the doctors. If I cried, they would call me unstable. I realized then that I could not win this war with words. I had to stop fighting on their terms. I sat back down and folded my hands in my lap. I took a deep breath and let the mask of the submissive broken wife slide back into place. "I am sorry, Mama," I whispered, lowering my eyes. "It was my fault." But inside my mind was sharpening a blade. If they wanted a crazy wife, I would give them one, but not the kind they were expecting. The front door clicked shut, and the heavy silence of the house returned, but this time it felt different. It was no longer the silence of a tomb, but the silence of an ambush. Darnell had walked Ashley and Mama Patrice to their cars, likely to gloat about how unstable I looked during dinner. I knew his routine. He would smoke a cigar on the porch for exactly 15 minutes to celebrate his victory. That gave me a quarter of an hour to turn this house from a prison into a panopticon. I kicked off my heels and ran as fast as my atrophied legs would carry me to the laundry room. Months ago, before the blue pills turned my brain into mush, I had ordered a high-end surveillance kit online. I had suspected Darnell was stealing cash from my wallet, and I wanted proof. I had hidden the package inside an empty box of detergent on the top shelf, and in my drugged haze, I had completely forgotten it existed until tonight. I dragged a step stool over and clawed at the box. My fingers brushed against the cold plastic packaging. It was still there. I ripped it open and pulled out a camera lens no larger than a pinhead designed to be mounted inside a standard smoke detector. I rushed back to the living room, the central hub where Darnell held his court. The ceiling was 12 feet high. I dragged the heavy oak dining chair over my arms, trembling with the effort. I was so weak. My muscles burned as if I were lifting weights, but I forced myself to climb. I stood on my tiptoes, reaching for the smoke detector above the fireplace. I had to unscrew the faceplate without dropping it. My hands were slick with sweat. If I broke it, the game was over. I held my breath and twisted. The cover came free. I quickly mounted the tiny lens inside the casing, connecting it to the power source of the detector itself, so it would never run out of battery. I snapped the cover back on, just as I heard the heavy thud of the front door unlocking. I practically jumped off the chair and shoved it back to the table. I smoothed my dress and sat down on the sofa, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Darnell walked in, smelling of expensive tobacco and smug satisfaction. He looked at me sitting there in the dark. "Still up, Dominique?" he asked, loosening his tie. "You should go to bed. You have a big day of resting tomorrow." I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I did not look away. "I am just thinking, Darnell," I said softly. He chuckled, shaking his head as he walked toward the kitchen. "Don't hurt yourself trying to think, baby. Just leave everything to me." He walked right under the smoke detector, completely unaware that a tiny red light had blinked once inside the casing. I slipped my hand into my pocket and touched the burner phone. The app was already live. I had a front row seat to his destruction, and the show was just beginning. The next morning, I waited until the rumble of Darnell Jaguar faded down the street before I made my move. I dressed in the most professional clothes I could find, trying to cover the gauntness of my frame with a tailored blazer. I needed money, real money. Not the allowance Darnell left on the dresser like I was a child, but the substantial funds sitting in my personal savings account. I grabbed my spare car keys from the bottom of my jewelry box and slipped out the side door. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my Mercedes so tightly my knuckles turned white. Driving felt foreign after months of being chauffeured to doctor's appointments, but the muscle memory kicked in. I drove straight to the downtown branch of First National Bank, where the tellers knew me by name, or at least they used to. I walked into the lobby, and the air conditioning hit me like a wall of ice. It smelled of stale coffee and money. I went straight to the ATM in the corner, not wanting to make small talk with anyone until I had cash in my hand. I slid my platinum debit card into the slot and typed in my PIN. The screen flashed processing for what felt like an eternity. Then, with a mechanical grinding noise, the machine clamped shut. The screen turned red. "Card retained. Contact your financial institution." My heart dropped into my stomach. I pressed the cancel button frantically, but the machine was lifeless. It had swallowed my access to the outside world. I forced myself to remain calm. I was Dominique the forensic accountant, not Dominique the mental patient. I walked over to the teller counter. A young woman named Sarah, whom I had helped with her tax questions last year, was working the window. When she saw me, her eyes widened slightly, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Mrs. Washington," she said, her voice tight. "I did not expect to see you today." I tried to smile, but I could feel the corners of my mouth trembling. "The ATM ate my card, Sarah. I need to make a withdrawal from my primary checking. Just 5,000 for now." Sarah did not type anything. She did not even look at her screen. She looked at the manager standing in the glass office behind her, and then back at me with a look of profound pity. "I cannot do that, Mrs. Washington." I stared at her. "What do you mean you cannot? It is my money." Sarah lowered her voice, leaning over the counter as if sharing a dirty secret. "Your accounts have been flagged. Your husband came in yesterday with a court order. He activated an emergency conservatorship. He claimed you have lost the capacity to manage your financial affairs due to your condition." The room spun. The sounds of the bank, the counting machines, the hushed conversations faded into a buzzing white noise. Conservatorship. It was the legal equivalent of being buried alive. Darnell had not just stolen my money, he had stripped me of my personhood. Under the law, I was no longer an adult woman with rights. I was a child, and he was my warden. "But Sarah," I whispered, gripping the cold marble counter, "I am standing right here. I am lucid. Does that not matter?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "I am sorry, Mrs. Washington. The system has locked you out. You have zero available balance. You need his authorization for anything over $20. I walked out of the bank and into the blinding sunlight. I had millions of dollars to my name, but I could not even buy a sandwich. I was completely destitute and entirely alone. I stared at the fuel gauge on the dashboard. The needle was hovering dangerously close to empty, much like my own spirit. I had enough gas to get to one place, and I chose Tiana. Tiana was not just a friend, she was my sister in every way that mattered. We had survived finals at Spelman College together, navigated our first heartbreaks together, and she had been the maid of honor standing beside me when I made the mistake of marrying Darnell. If anyone would believe me, it would be her. I pulled up to her wrought iron gates in Buckhead and pressed the buzzer, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I needed a hug. I needed a glass of water. I needed someone to tell me I was not crazy. The intercom crackled to life, but instead of the buzzer releasing the lock, I heard Tiana's voice. It sounded tinny and distant. "Dominique, is that you?" I leaned out the window, relief flooding my chest. "Yes, T, it is me. Please open the gate. I am in trouble. Darnell has done something to my accounts and I think he is poisoning me. I need a place to stay just for tonight." There was a long pause. The silence stretched until it felt physical. When Tiana spoke again, her voice was not warm. It was trembling with fear. "You need to leave, Dom. You are not safe to be around right now." I blinked, confused. "What are you talking about, Tiana?" "It is me. Open the gate." "No," she snapped. "Darnell called me this morning. He told me everything. He told me about the knife, Dom. He told me you threatened to hurt him while he was sleeping. He said you have been off your meds for weeks and you are in a manic episode." I felt the blood drain from my face. Darnell had not just stolen my money, he had assassinated my character. He had planted a landmine in my sanctuary before I even arrived. "Tiana, listen to me," I pleaded, shouting into the speaker. "He is lying. There was no knife. He is drugging me. Please just look at me." "I cannot take that risk," Tiana said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I have my kids here. Darnell said you are unpredictable and violent. He said if you showed up I should call him immediately for your own safety. Go home, Dom. Go home and let your husband take care of you before you hurt someone. Please do not make me call the police." The intercom clicked off, leaving me sitting in the silence of the driveway. I looked at the closed gate, the physical barrier between me and the one person I thought would save me. My best friend looked at me and saw a monster because Darnell had handed her the lens. I put the car in reverse and backed away. I was not just broke and poisoned. I was now a pariah. I pulled the car into the garage and sat in the silence for a long moment. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. I had no money. I had no friends. I had nowhere to run. The only thing I had was the truth and a tiny camera hidden in a smoke detector. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. I was walking back into the lion den, but this time I was not a gazelle. I was a hunter waiting for the right moment to strike. I opened the door to the house and found Darnell waiting for me in the foyer. He was leaning against the staircase sipping a glass of amber liquid that looked like scotch. He looked relaxed, almost bored. "Welcome home, crazy," he said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "I assume Tiana did not open the gate." "I told you, Dominique, you are sick. People are afraid of you." I stood my ground. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "I know about the pills, Darnell. I found the bag in your golf clubs. I know you forged the medical records. It is over." I expected him to panic. I expected him to deny it. Instead, he smiled. It was a slow, terrifying smile that did not reach his eyes. He set his glass down on the entry table with a deliberate click. "You know," he said softly, unbuttoning his cuffs. "That is the problem with you, Dom. You are too smart for your own good. But here's the thing about the truth. It does not matter what is true. It only matters what people believe. And right now, everyone believes you are violent." He took a step toward me. I tensed, preparing to defend myself. I thought he was going to hit me. I raised my hands to block the blow, but he did not swing at me. He swung at himself. With a sickening crunch, Darnell punched himself directly in the left eye. His head snapped back from the force of the blow. I gasped, stepping back in horror. He did not stop. He grabbed the collar of his expensive dress shirt and ripped it open, popping buttons across the marble floor. Then he threw himself backwards, crashing into the antique vase on the console table. Porcelain shattered everywhere. He rolled onto the floor amidst the shards and started screaming. "Help me!" he shrieked, his voice reaching a pitch of terrified hysteria. "Please stop, Dom. Put the knife down. Please do not kill me." I stood there, frozen, my arms at my sides, watching a performance that was worthy of an Academy Award. There was no knife in my hand. I had not touched him. But to anyone listening outside, to the neighbors, to the 911 operator he was about to call, it sounded like a murder in progress. Darnell looked up at me from the floor, blood trickling from his nose where he had hit the ground. His eyes were wild, but behind the panic was a cold calculation. He reached for the landline phone on the table, his hand shaking theatrically. He dialed 3 numbers. I watched him lie to the operator, sobbing about how his schizophrenic wife had finally snapped. In that moment, I realized Darnell was not just a thief. He was a psychopath. He was willing to destroy his own face just to destroy my life. I did not move to stop him. I just stood there and let him dig his own grave, knowing that the tiny red light above the fireplace was blinking, recording every single frame of his madness. The living room was suddenly bathed in chaotic strobes of red and blue light, cutting through the darkness like strobe lights in a nightmare. I barely had time to process the sound of sirens wailing in the driveway before the heavy oak front door was kicked open. 2 officers stormed in, guns drawn, their boots thudding heavily against the marble floor. To them, the scene was crystal clear. A battered husband bleeding on the floor, surrounded by shattered porcelain, and a stone-faced wife standing over him. Darnell scrambled backward on the Persian rug, kicking his legs like a terrified child trying to get away from a monster. "Officer, please do not shoot her," he cried, his voice cracking perfectly. "She does not know what she is doing. She is sick." I tried to open my mouth to say that I had not touched him, to say that the blood on his face was from his own fist, but words failed me. The shock had severed the connection between my brain and my tongue. "Get on the ground, ma'am," the taller officer shouted. He did not wait for me to comply. He grabbed my shoulder and forced me to my knees. The impact jarred my spine, but I was too numb to feel the pain. I looked up at the officer, trying to communicate with my eyes, trying to plead without words, but he was not looking at me. He was looking at Darnell. "Are you injured, sir?" the second officer asked, holstering his weapon and kneeling beside my husband. Darnell wiped blood from his nose with his sleeve and nodded pitifully. "She came at me out of nowhere," he sobbed. "I tried to calm her down. I tried to give her the medication, but she just snapped." Darnell reached into his torn jacket pocket with a trembling hand and pulled out the folded papers I had seen earlier. "The fake medical file from Ashley." "Check her pockets, officer," he stammered. "She might have another knife. And please be careful, she is diagnosed with severe paranoid schizophrenia. Here is the court order for my emergency conservatorship." The officer took the papers. I watched his eyes scan the forged signature of Dr. Evans. I watched his expression shift from aggression to pity, and then to disgust. He looked at me, not as a citizen with rights, but as a liability. He looked at the woman on her knees in a silk dress and saw a lunatic. A dangerous burden. "I am sorry you have to deal with this, sir," the officer said, handing the papers back to Darnell. "Domestic disturbances with mental health patients are always the hardest." I realized then how perfectly Darnell had set this stage. He used the prejudices of the system against me. To them, I was just another angry, unhinged black woman, and he was the saint who had stayed to take care of me despite the abuse. I looked at Darnell and saw a flicker of triumph behind his tears. He had turned the law into his personal weapon. The officer pulled out a pair of zip ties instead of handcuffs, treating me like an animal that needed to be restrained for transport. I did not fight. I knew that any resistance would only prove the lie true. I let them bind my wrists behind my back, my eyes fixed on the smoke detector above the fireplace. They could take me away tonight, but they could not take the truth stored on that memory card. I was braced for the cold, hard seat of a police cruiser and the humiliation of being booked at the county jail. I had already mentally prepared my phone call to Mr. Henderson, but Darnell had no intention of letting me enter the public legal system where a public defender might actually look at the evidence. Through the open front door, I saw the vehicle that had pulled into the driveway behind the patrol cars. It was not a squad car. It was a sleek private ambulance emblazoned with the navy blue logo of St. Jude Psychiatric Center. The sight of that logo made my blood run cold. That was Ashley's kingdom. That was the place where she forged signatures and manipulated dosages. If I got into that van, I would disappear. The police officer hauled me to my feet. "Medical transport is here," he said to his partner. "The husband requested a transfer to her treating facility. It is better this way. We do not have to process a 5150 hold down at the station." I tried to scream. I tried to tell them that St. Jude was not a hospital. It was a trap, but the officer tightened his grip on my arm. "Stop resisting, ma'am," he barked. Two paramedics entered the foyer. They did not look like healers. They looked like bouncers dressed in scrubs. One of them was holding a preloaded syringe. "Please," I begged, looking from the police officer to the paramedics. "You do not understand. My sister-in-law works there. They are going to kill me. Check my blood. Just check my blood for toxins." The taller paramedic ignored me completely. He looked over my shoulder at Darnell, who was still sitting on the floor dabbing at his bloody nose with a tissue. "Is this the patient, Mr. Washington?" he asked. Darnell nodded, looking tragically at me. "Yes. Please just make sure she does not hurt herself. She is having a severe psychotic break." The police officer stepped back, washing his hands of the situation. The paramedic moved with terrifying speed. He did not ask for my consent. He did not check my vitals. He grabbed my upper arm and jammed the needle through the silk of my dress and deep into the muscle. I gasped at the sharp sting, but the reaction was immediate. It felt like liquid lead was being poured into my veins. My knees buckled. The room began to tilt sideways. The crystal chandelier overhead blurred into a streak of light. I fell forward, but the second paramedic caught me. They strapped me onto a gurney right there in my living room. I could feel my limbs becoming heavy, my tongue swelling in my mouth. I tried to fight the darkness creeping in at the edges of my vision, but the drug was too powerful. It was not just a sedative, it was a chemical sledgehammer. As they wheeled me out the front door, the last thing I saw was Darnell standing in the doorway. He was not crying anymore. He was checking his watch. I wanted to tell him that the camera was still recording. I wanted to tell him that he had made a mistake by keeping me alive. But the words dissolved on my tongue. The doors of the ambulance slammed shut, sealing me in total darkness, and for the first time in my life, I was completely powerless. Consciousness returned to me in fragments. First came the smell. It was the sharp, stinging scent of industrial antiseptic mixed with stale air. Then came the light. It was not the soft morning sun filtering through my bedroom curtains. It was a harsh fluorescent glare that bored into my retinas even through my closed eyelids. I tried to lift my hand to shield my eyes, but my arm felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The sedative they had injected me with in my foyer had done its job, leaving me paralyzed in a state of chemical heavy gravity. I forced my eyes open, and the world swam into focus. I was lying on a thin mattress that smelled of bleach. I tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea crashed over me, forcing me to grip the edge of the bed. I reached out to steady myself against the wall, but my hand did not meet cool plaster or wood. It sank into thick vinyl padding. I pulled my hand back as if I had touched a hot stove. I looked around properly for the first time, and the air caught in my throat. The room was a perfect white cube. The walls were padded from floor to ceiling. There were no windows. There was no furniture other than the bolted-down cot I was sitting on. There was not even a handle on the heavy steel door. I was in an isolation cell. Panic, cold, and primal spiked in my chest. I scrambled off the bed, my legs tangling in the rough hospital blanket. I rushed to the door and pounded on it with my fists. The sound was dull and muted, swallowed instantly by the soundproofing. "Hello!" I screamed, my voice raspy and dry. "Let me out! I am not crazy. Let me out!" Silence was my only answer. I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the door, but I could not hear anything from the other side. No footsteps, no voices. I was completely cut off from the human race. I backed away from the door, breathing hard. My hands were trembling again, but this time, it was from terror, not medication. I looked down at myself. My silk dress was gone. I was wearing a shapeless gray hospital gown made of scratchy fabric. They had stripped me while I was unconscious. The violation of it made my skin crawl. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop the shaking. That was when I saw it. High up in the corner of the room, protected by a heavy wire cage, was a black dome camera. The small red light blinked rhythmically like a heartbeat. I froze. I knew exactly who was watching that feed. It was not a doctor concerned for my safety. It was Ashley. She had put me in the VIP suite of her personal hell. I realized with terrifying clarity that this was not a hospital stay. This was a disappearance. Darnell had legally signed me over to a facility where his sister-in-law controlled the locks and the dosage. I stared directly into the camera lens. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the padding off the walls. But I knew that was exactly what they wanted. They wanted a show. They wanted footage of the crazy woman losing her mind to show the judge on Friday. I forced myself to take a deep breath, holding it until my lungs burned. I walked back to the cot and sat down, crossing my legs. I straightened my spine and stared at the steel door. I was trapped in a box, but my mind was still free, and I would not give them a single frame of footage they could use against me. I lost track of time in the white box. There was no day or night inside the padded cell, only the constant hum of the ventilation system and the unblinking red eye of the camera. My mouth was dry and my head was pounding from the chemical cocktail they had forced into my veins, but I forced myself to sit upright. I would not let them find me curled in a ball on the floor. Suddenly, the heavy steel bolts of the door retracted with a deafening metallic clank. The door swung open, and a figure stepped into the room, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. It was Ashley. She looked entirely different here than she did at family dinners. At home, she played the part of the bubbly, helpful sister-in-law. Here she was the warden. She wore navy blue scrubs that were tailored to fit her perfectly, and a stethoscope hung around her neck like a trophy. She held a clipboard in one hand and a syringe in the other. Two large orderlies stood behind her waiting for a command. Ashley dismissed them with a flick of her wrist. "Leave us," she said, her voice echoing off the padded walls. "I need to administer the patient assessment personally." The orderlies nodded and closed the door, leaving us alone in the terrifying silence. Ashley walked toward me, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the floor. She did not look at my chart. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "You look terrible, Dominique," she said casually, tapping the clipboard with her pen. "The sedative really takes it out of you, does it not?" I glared at her, fighting the urge to lunge. If I attacked her, I would never get out. "What do you want, Ashley?" I rasped, my voice sounding like sandpaper. "Just tell me what you want." Ashley laughed, a soft, chilling sound. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, until I could smell her expensive vanilla perfume, masking the scent of the hospital antiseptic. She leaned down until her face was inches from mine. Her blue eyes were empty of any warmth. "I do not want anything from you, Dom," she whispered. "I already have it. You are in my world now. Out there, you might be the smart rich girl with the fancy degree. But in here, you are just a number." She used the tip of the syringe to lift my chin, forcing me to look at her. "Listen to me very carefully," she hissed, her voice dropping to a menacing register. "In this building, I am God. I decide when you eat. I decide when you sleep. And I decide what goes into your veins. If you think Darnell is going to save you, think again. He is terrified of losing his lifestyle, so he will do whatever I say." She pulled back slightly and tapped the clipboard. "On Friday, the lawyers are coming. You are going to sign over the trust fund and the deed to the house. If you do that, I might let you move to a communal ward with a window. If you do not, I will double your dosage, and you will spend the next 30 years drooling on yourself in this box. Do we understand each other?" She did not wait for an answer. She stood up, smoothed her scrubs, and turned on her heel. I watched her walk out the door, knowing that my fight was no longer just about money. It was a fight for my very soul. For the first 48 hours, I did nothing but watch. My body was trapped in a gray jumpsuit and shuffling along the linoleum floors of the common room during mandatory recreation time, but my mind was back at my desk at the firm. Forensic accounting is not just about math, it is about behavior. It is about noticing when the numbers on the page do not match the reality in the room. I sat in the corner clutching a plastic cup of lukewarm water, and I turned my gaze on Ashley. She moved through the ward not like a nurse, but like a floor manager at a casino. She was confident, untouchable, and as I soon realized, incredibly greedy. Most people would see a nurse dispensing medication. I saw a transaction log. I watched Ashley at the rolling cart. She would unlock the narcotics drawer with a key that never left her neck. I counted the pills as she popped them out of the blister packs. 1 for the patient, 2 for her pocket. It was a subtle sleight of hand, a magician trick practiced 1,000 times. She would log the dosage on the tablet as administered, but the pills never touched the patient's tongue. I did the mental math instantly. Oxycodone and Xanax have a high street value. If she skimmed just 20% of the daily inventory, she was making an extra $5,000 a week tax-free. But the skimming was just the base of her pyramid scheme. The real money was in the VIP wing. St. Jude catered to the wealthy and the addicted, the sons of senators and the wives of CEOs who needed to dry out away from the paparazzi. I watched a young man in a silk robe approach the station. He did not look sick, he looked bored. He leaned over the counter and whispered something to Ashley. She did not reprimand him. She smiled that tight, conspiratorial smile I knew so well. He slid a Cartier watch across the counter. She covered it with a clipboard and slid a small burner phone back to him. The exchange was flawless, but to a trained eye it was screaming with evidence. Ashley was not just a corrupt nurse, she was running a black market distribution ring inside a medical facility. She was selling contact with the outside world to those who could pay and silencing those who could not. I looked around the room, realizing that everyone here was a potential line item in her ledger. I was the asset being liquidated. The boy in the silk robe was a recurring revenue stream. A cold calm washed over me. Greed is a powerful motivator, but it is also a fatal flaw. Greedy people get sloppy. They start to think they are invincible. They stop checking their blind spots. Ashley thought I was a vegetable, a broken woman drooling in the corner. She did not know that I was currently auditing her entire operation. She was building a fortune on illicit trades and forged logs. All I needed was one page of that real ledger. I looked at the nurse station again, specifically at the black notebook Ashley kept separate from the official digital tablets. That was it. That was the shadow book. If I could get my hands on that book, I would not just get out of here, I would send her to prison for 20 years. I took a sip of my water and let a small, genuine smile touch my lips. The audit had officially begun. The hierarchy of a psychiatric ward is not much different from the corporate structures I spent my career analyzing. There are the executives who take the credit and the laborers who do the actual work. For 3 days, I watched the dynamic between Ashley and the staff. Most of the nurses were like Ashley, vain and indifferent, but there was one exception, Latoya. She was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a back that was permanently bent from carrying the weight of this facility. While Ashley spent her shifts flirting with wealthy patients and falsifying logs, Latoya was changing bedpans, soothing screaming patients, and cleaning up the messes Ashley left behind. I waited for my opportunity. It came during the graveyard shift change when the hallway was quiet and the hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound. Latoya was restocking the linen cart near my room, her movements heavy and slow. I stood in the doorway of my room. I did not look like a patient anymore. I had washed my face and combed my hair with my fingers. I stood with the posture of the executive I used to be. "You have worked 3 double shifts in a row, Latoya," I said softly. She jumped, dropping a stack of towels. She looked around nervously to see if Ashley was nearby. "You are not supposed to be out of bed." "Mrs. Washington," she whispered, reaching for the towels. "Go back inside before Nurse Ashley writes you up." I stepped forward and knelt down to help her pick up the linens. I did not reach for the towels. I reached for her hand. It was rough and calloused. I looked at her shoes. They were white nursing sneakers, but the rubber on the soles was worn completely smooth, and I noticed a piece of duct tape holding the left one together. I looked at the lanyard around her neck, where an overdue notice for an electric bill was tucked behind her ID badge. "I used to find hidden assets for Fortune 500 companies, Latoya," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I know how to read a balance sheet, and right now I am reading yours. You are drowning. You are working 80 hours a week and you are still behind on your bills. And Ashley treats you like a servant because she knows you cannot afford to quit." Latoya pulled her hand away, but she did not leave. Her eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "You do not know anything about me," she snapped. But there was no heat in her voice, only exhaustion. "I know that you are the only person in this building who actually cares about the patients," I replied. "And I know that you know I am not crazy. You have seen the charts, Latoya. You have seen Ashley fake the medication logs. You know she is stealing from the inventory." I saw the conflict in her face. Fear warred with integrity. I leaned in closer, locking eyes with her. "I am not a charity case, Latoya. I am a millionaire. My husband has locked me in here to steal my estate, but if I get out, I get everything back, including my power. Help me and I will pay off every single debt you have. I will pay off your house. I will put your kids through college. But I need a phone, just for 10 minutes. Latoya looked at the camera in the corner, then back at me. The air in the hallway was thick with tension. She bit her lip, and for the first time I saw a spark of rebellion in her tired eyes. "Meet me in the laundry room in 20 minutes," she whispered, "and bring the notebook." The laundry room was the only place in the facility where the hum of the industrial dryers was loud enough to mask a conspiracy. I stood next to a folding table facing Latoya. She looked terrified, her eyes darting constantly toward the door. I knew I had to close this deal fast before her fear outweighed her desperation. I took a step closer, lowering my voice to a whisper that cut through the mechanical noise. "Latoya, listen to me. I am not just offering you cash. I am offering you justice. I have watched how Ashley speaks to you. I have watched her assign you the heaviest patients while the white nurses sit at the station drinking coffee. That is not just unfair. It is a hostile work environment, and it is illegal." Latoya gripped the edge of the laundry cart, her knuckles white. "You do not understand," she said, shaking her head. "Ashley is untouchable. Her brother-in-law owns the building. If I get fired, I lose my nursing license. I will never work again." I shook my head firmly. "You will not have to work again unless you want to. I have $7 million in liquid assets, Latoya. When I get out of here, I will pay off your mortgage. I will fully fund a college trust for your children. But more importantly, I will hire the best employment lawyers in Atlanta to represent you. We will sue St. Jude for racial discrimination and wrongful termination practices. We will not just get you a settlement. We will own this place." I saw the shift in her eyes. The resignation was replaced by a flicker of hunger. She had spent years being undervalued and overworked. Now I was handing her a sledgehammer to break the glass ceiling. "But I need a weapon too," I continued, pressing my advantage. "I need a phone. Just 10 minutes a night. I need to call my lawyer, and I need to document what is happening here." Latoya looked at the door, then back at me. She reached into the deep pocket of her scrubs. My heart hammered against my ribs. She pulled out a cheap prepaid smartphone, the kind with a cracked screen that she likely used to call her kids. She held it out, but she did not let go when I reached for it. 10 minutes, she whispered, her voice trembling. "If you get caught, I do not know you. If you get caught, I will say you stole it from my locker. Do you understand?" I nodded, solemnity etched into my face. "I understand. I am a forensic accountant, Latoya. I know how to erase a digital footprint. You have my word." She released the phone. It felt warm in my hand, like a living thing. It was heavy with possibility. "Thank you," I breathed, slipping it quickly into the waistband of my pants beneath my loose hospital shirt. Latoya turned back to the linen cart, her hands moving automatically to fold sheets, but her posture had changed. She stood a little taller. She was no longer just an employee. She was a co-conspirator. "Go," she said without looking at me. "Ashley does rounds in 5 minutes." I slipped out of the laundry room and walked back to my cell. The hallway felt different now. The fluorescent lights seemed less harsh. I was still a prisoner, but for the first time in weeks, I was armed. I huddled under the thin, scratchy blanket, pulling it tight around my shoulders to create a tent of darkness. To the camera watching from the corner, it would look like I was shivering in my sleep. But beneath the fabric, my hands were moving with frantic precision. I pressed the power button on the cheap burner phone Latoya had given me. The screen lit up, casting a faint blue glow against my chest. I dimmed the brightness immediately. I had 10 minutes. 10 minutes to save my life before the battery died or Ashley decided to make a surprise inspection. My fingers hovered over the keypad. I did not have to look up the number. I had memorized it when I was 12 years old, sitting in the mahogany library of my grandmother's house while she dictated her will. It was the number of Archibald Henderson, the most ruthless estate lawyer in Georgia. Darnell and his mother believed Mr. Henderson had died of a stroke 3 years ago. They believed it because I had let them believe it. In reality, he had simply retired to a quiet farmhouse in Savannah to breed racehorses. I prayed he was still awake. I prayed he still remembered me. I dialed the number. The ringtone was a sharp trill that seemed deafening in the silence of my cell. 1 ring, 2 rings. My heart hammered against my ribs. 3 rings. Pick up, I whispered into the darkness. Please pick up. Hello. The voice was gruff, deep, and undeniably alive. It was the sound of old leather and expensive scotch. Tears pricked my eyes. Mr. Henderson, I whispered, pressing the phone so hard against my ear it hurt. It is Dominique. Dominique Washington. There was a pause on the line, then the rustle of papers. Dominique, I have not heard your voice in years. Your husband sent out a notice that you were in Switzerland seeking treatment. He said you were unreachable. He lied. I said the words tumbling out in a rush. He lied about everything. I am not in Switzerland. I am in St. Jude Psychiatric Center. Darnell has filed for an emergency conservatorship. He is claiming I have schizophrenia. He is trying to take the trust fund and the house. They have me heavily sedated, Mr. Henderson. My sister-in-law is the head nurse here. They are forcing me to sign papers on Friday. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, but it was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a predator spotting prey. I heard the distinct click of a pen being uncapped. Tell me everything, he commanded. Do not leave out a single detail. I told him. I told him about the blue pills in the golf bag. I told him about the forged medical records. I told him about the camera I had hidden in the smoke detector and the money Ashley was laundering through the pharmacy. I spoke for 7 minutes straight, pouring out the nightmare that had become my life. When I finished, I was breathless and shaking. Mr. Henderson let out a low growl. I always knew that man was a snake, he said, his voice vibrating with controlled rage. He thinks I am dead, does he? He thinks there is no one left to protect the estate your grandmother built. Well, he is about to learn that some ghosts bite back. I gripped the phone. Can you help me? I asked, my voice breaking. Can you stop them? Mr. Henderson's voice softened but lost none of its steel. You just worry about staying alive, Dominique. Do not eat anything they give you unless you see it opened. Do not sign anything. And on Friday when they drag you into that courtroom, keep your head up. I will be there, and I will bring the fire of hell with me. Now hang up and hide that phone. The line went dead. I stared at the screen for a second before powering it down. I slipped the phone back into the waistband of my pants. Under the blanket I was still trembling, but it was no longer from fear. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 6 months, I slept without nightmares. The cavalry was coming, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. The handover happened in the deafening roar of the laundry room during the Tuesday night shift change. LaToya did not look at me. She simply shoved a bundle of dirty sheets into my arms and whispered that she had hidden it inside the pillowcase. I walked back to my cell, clutching the bundle to my chest, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I waited until the lights dimmed for the night and the hallway camera stopped panning before I crawled under my thin blanket. I pulled out the small black moleskin notebook. It looked innocuous enough to be a diary, but as I flipped it open, I knew I was holding a hand grenade. I clicked on the flashlight of the burner phone, shielding the glow with my body. The pages were covered in Ashley handwriting. To the untrained eye, it looked like a mess of random dates and initials. To a forensic accountant, it was a confession. I ignored the columns detailing the inventory theft of OxyContin and Xanax. That was petty crime. I was looking for the money trail that connected my husband to this nightmare. I flipped to the back of the book where the larger sums were recorded. The pattern emerged almost immediately. Every Friday there was a deposit logged as patient services consulting fee ranging from $10,000 to $15,000. I recognized the source immediately. These were transfers coming from my joint account with Darnell, legally disguised as medical expenses for my care. But it was the outgoing column that told the real story. The money did not stay in the hospital accounts. Within hours of the deposit, Ashley was wiring 90% of it to a shell company called Riverboat, LLC. I froze. I knew that name. 2 years ago, during a background check on a shady developer, I had flagged Riverboat LLC. It was not a company. It was a holding front for an underground gambling syndicate operating out of Atlantic City. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with terrifying clarity. Darnell was not investing in real estate. He was hemorrhaging money at the tables. He had gambled away his own fortune, and now he was burning through mine to keep his kneecaps intact. I ran my finger down the column of dates. The transfers matched perfectly with Darnell weekend business trips, the time he went to Miami for a conference, the week he spent in Vegas for a seminar. He was drowning in debt, and Ashley was his lifeline. She was using her position at St. Jude to launder my money, washing it through the hospital books before funneling it to the bookies. They were not just stealing my life, they were liquidating it to pay for his addiction. I took a photo of every single page, my hands steady with cold fury. This notebook proved everything. It proved the embezzlement, it proved the money laundering, and it proved that my institutionalization was nothing more than a financial strategy. Darnell needed me locked away so he could drain the trust fund without me noticing. I closed the book and hid it inside the mattress. They thought they were burying me, but they had just handed me the shovel to dig their graves. I turned off the phone and lay in the darkness. I was not just a victim anymore. I was the auditor, and the final report was going to be devastating. Thursday morning arrived with the metallic clang of the visitation room door unlocking. I was sitting at the bolted-down table wearing my gray hospital jumpsuit, staring at the scratches on the steel surface. I had spent the last hour practicing my performance in the mirror. I needed to look broken. I needed to look like a woman whose mind had been completely eroded by medication. I let my mouth hang slightly open and kept my eyes unfocused as Darnell walked in. He was wearing his best navy suit, the one he usually reserved for closing million-dollar real estate deals. Today he was closing the biggest deal of his life, and I was the property. Mama Patrice followed him into the room. She was overdressed for a psychiatric ward, wearing a fur coat and enough gold jewelry to sink a small boat. She looked at me with open disgust, wrinkling her nose as if the very air around me was contaminated. Trailing behind them was a man I did not recognize. He was short, with slicked back hair and a briefcase that looked expensive but tacky. He had the shifty eyes of a lawyer who chased ambulances, or in this case, facilitated fraud. Darnell sat down across from me, his face arranged into a mask of deep concern. "Hey, baby," he said softly, reaching out to cover my hand with his. I flinched, pulling my hand back slowly as if his touch physically hurt. It was a nice touch. I saw the lawyer nod approvingly at my reaction. To him, it confirmed that I was mentally unstable. Darnell sighed and looked at his mother. "She is worse today, Mama. She hardly recognizes me." Mama Patrice did not feign sympathy. She slammed her crocodile skin handbag onto the table. "Let us just get this over with, Darnell. This place gives me the creeps." The lawyer cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of documents thick enough to be a novel. "Mrs. Washington, my name is Mr. Thorne. I am representing your husband in the matter of your estate. Due to your deteriorating condition and the court-ordered conservatorship, we need to restructure your assets to ensure they are protected." He slid the papers toward me. I looked down at the top page. The bold letters seemed to swim before my eyes, but my forensic accountant brain snapped a mental picture. Irrevocable trust transfer. It was a document that would sign over total control of my $10 million inheritance to Darnell Washington. It was not protection. It was highway robbery. Darnell leaned in, his voice dropping to that manipulative whisper I used to mistake for intimacy. "Dom, honey, listen to me. You are not well. You have been spending money erratically. We just want to make sure the money is safe until you get better. Just sign the papers, baby. Do it for us. Do it so I can pay for the best doctors to help you." I looked at him, blinking slowly. I let a little bit of drool gather at the corner of my mouth before wiping it away with a shaking hand. "I want to go home," I mumbled, slurring my words intentionally. Darnell nodded quickly, pushing a pen into my hand. "I know, baby. I know. Sign this and we can talk about going home. Mama Patrice tapped her long red fingernail on the signature line. Right here, Dominique. Stop wasting time. I held the pen. My hand trembled violently. I looked at the paper, then at Darnell. I saw the greed in his eyes, the naked hunger for the fortune he had already spent in his mind. He thought he had won. He thought I was a puppet. I lowered the pen to the paper and prepared to deliver the performance of a lifetime. The black ink of the fountain pen hovered over the crisp white paper. To the three vultures watching me, I looked like a woman on the brink of total collapse. I let my jaw go slack and allowed a thin line of saliva to escape the corner of my mouth. It was humiliating and degrading, but it was necessary. I needed them to believe that the lights were on, but nobody was home. Mama Patrice looked at the drool on my chin with undisguised revulsion, but she did not look away. She was too fixated on the $10 million prize sitting on the table. Darnell pulled out his latest model iPhone. Just a precaution, he said, holding it up to frame my face. We need to document that you are signing this voluntarily, baby, just in case anyone questions it later. He tapped the screen and the red recording dot appeared. Say it, Dom. Say I am signing this of my own free will. I let my head loll to the side, acting as if the weight of my own skull was too much to bear. Free will. I mumbled my words thick and slurred. I made sure to blink rapidly, my eyes darting around the room as if I were tracking invisible flies. Excellent. Darnell whispered, zoom lens focused tight on my face. Go ahead, baby. Write on the dotted line. I lowered the pen. The tip scratched against the paper. This was the moment. The document was an irrevocable transfer of the Washington Family Trust. To be legally binding, it required the signature of Dominique Marie Washington exactly as it appeared on my government identification. I pressed down hard, making the pen shake. I wrote Dominique. Then for the middle initial instead of M, I wrote X. And for the last name I did not write Washington. In a loopy, erratic scrawl that looked like the scratching of a child, I wrote void. I finished the signature with a violent slash of the pen that ripped through the paper slightly. It looked like the chaotic mark of a madwoman. To a casual observer, it looked like a signature, but to a forensic handwriting expert or a judge, it was a nullification. I had not signed my name. I had vandalized the contract. Darnell did not even check. He was too busy panning the camera back to his own face to fake a sympathetic smile. Good girl, he cooed, ending the recording. He snatched the paper away from me before the ink could dry. He handed it to the shady lawyer, who shoved it into his briefcase without a second glance. They were so blinded by their victory, so eager to get their hands on the money, that they forgot the first rule of contract law. Read the fine print. I let the pen drop from my fingers and slumped back in my chair, closing my eyes. Darnell patted my shoulder. You did the right thing, Dom. We are going to take good care of you. I listened to the sound of the briefcase snapping shut. They thought they had just secured a fortune. In reality, they had just filmed evidence of their own coercion and walked away with a worthless piece of paper. I swallowed the bile in my throat and waited for them to leave. The performance was over, and I had nailed every single scene. The door to the visitation room clicked shut behind Darnell and his entourage, leaving me alone with the buzzing silence of the facility. I did not move for a long time, keeping up the act of the catatonic wife, just in case they were watching the monitors on their way out. But I knew Darnell well. He was not watching me anymore. He had what he came for, or at least he thought he did. To him, I was no longer a threat, I was just a line item in his budget that had finally been balanced. Later that night, during the chaotic shift change, Latoya slipped into my room under the pretense of changing my bed linens. She did not say a word. She simply pressed her cracked smartphone into my hand and plugged in a pair of cheap wired earbuds. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. I hit the play button on the voice memo app. The recording was grainy, at first filled with the rustle of fabric, as Latoya must have hidden the phone in her scrub pocket. Then the voices came through loud and clear. It was the staff break room. I could hear the hum of the vending machine and the distinct sound of Darnell laughter. It was a sound I used to love, a deep baritone that made me feel safe. Now it sounded like a shovel hitting dirt. Man, did you see her face? Darnell bragged, his voice echoing slightly. She was completely gone, drooling on herself. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Ashley laughed and I could hear the clinking of what sounded like a soda can. "Do not go soft on me now, Darnell," she said. "The cocktail I gave her this morning was a double dose. She will not remember her own name for a week. By the time she wakes up, the house will be sold." "That is the plan," Darnell replied, and I could practically hear him grinning. I called the realtor on the way out. "We are listing the mansion for $3 million under market value for a quick cash sale. Once I pay off the guys in Atlantic City, I am heading straight to the dealership. I have had my eye on that matte black McLaren for months." "You better not spend my cut on a car," Ashley warned, her tone sharp. "I took a huge risk forging those medical logs, Darnell. If the medical board finds out, I lose my license." "Relax, Ash," Darnell scoffed. "Who is going to tell them? The vegetable in room 4. She signed the papers. "It is legal. We won." I pulled the earbuds out, my hands trembling not with fear, but with a cold, dark satisfaction. They had confessed to everything. In less than 3 minutes of audio, they had admitted to the drugging, the forgery, the gambling debts, and the premeditated sale of my assets. They were so drunk on their own success that they had forgotten the most basic rule of criminal enterprise. Silence is survival. I looked up at Latoya, who was watching me expectantly. "You got them," she whispered. I nodded slowly, handing the phone back to her. "We got them, Latoya. They are planning to buy supercars with money they do not have. They think the war is over. They have no idea that I just nuked the battlefield. Keep this recording safe. On Friday, we are going to play it for the judge, and I want to see Darnell's face when he realizes his McLaren is actually a prison cell." The vibration of the burner phone against my hip was the only lifeline I had left. I waited until the night nurse passed my door before pulling it out. The screen was cracked and dim, but the message from Mr. Henderson shone like a beacon in the darkness. It was short and commanded authority, just like the man himself. The text read, "Emergency hearing scheduled for Friday morning 9 a.m. Do not try to escape. If you run, you look like a fugitive. If you walk into that courtroom in handcuffs, you look like a victim. Let them bring you to us. See you in court." I stared at the words, letting the strategy sink in. My instinct screamed at me to run. I wanted to bribe Latoya to open the back door. I wanted to sprint into the parking lot and steal a car. I wanted to be as far away from Ashley and her needles as possible. But Mr. Henderson was right. Darnell had painted a narrative that I was dangerous and unpredictable. If I broke out of a secure facility, I would be proving him right. I would be the crazy woman on the loose. But if I let them drag me to court, if I let them present me as a trophy of their victory, I could dismantle them in front of the judge. I signaled for Latoya. She slipped into the room, her face pale with worry. She had heard the recording. She knew how dangerous these people were. "We have to get you out of here," she whispered, checking the hallway. "I can leave the loading dock door unlocked during the delivery at 4 a.m. You can make a run for it." I shook my head slowly, gripping her arm. "No, Latoya. I am not running. I am going to court." I showed her the message. She read it and frowned. "They are going to drug you, Dominique. Ashley said she is giving you a triple dose on Friday morning. She wants you unable to speak. She wants you drooling in front of the judge so they can grant the permanent conservatorship in 5 minutes. That is where you come in," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I need you to be on shift, Friday morning. When Ashley prepares the injection, I need you to swap it. Saline water, vitamin B12. I do not care what it is, as long as it keeps me clear-headed. Can you do that?" Latoya hesitated. Her hands were shaking. "That is risky, Dominique. Ashley watches the cart like a hawk. But then she looked at my face. She saw the fire that had returned to my eyes, the same fire that used to terrify CEOs when I audited their books. She took a deep breath and nodded. I will do it. I will swap the vials. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling. I did not sleep. I mentally rehearsed every piece of evidence I had gathered. The blue pills in the golf bag, the forged medical logs, the gambling debts, the confession on tape. I visualized the courtroom. I visualized Darnell's smug face. I visualized the moment I would stand up and burn his world to the ground. I was not a prisoner anymore. I was a Trojan horse, and Friday was the day the walls would come down. The night before my trial felt less like the eve of a battle and more like the calm before an execution. The facility was quiet, wrapped in a suffocating silence that was only broken by the hum of the ventilation system. I sat on the edge of my bed waiting. I knew she was coming. Ashley would not risk me waking up lucid tomorrow morning. She needed a guarantee. She needed me to be a drooling, incoherent mess when I faced the judge, so that Darnell could play the part of the grieving husband, forced to take control. At 3 a.m, the lock on my door disengaged with a heavy thud. Ashley stepped into the room. She was not alone. 2 burly orderlies stood in the hallway blocking the exit just in case I decided to fight. Ashley held a silver tray. On it sat a single syringe filled with a thick amber liquid. It looked viscous and deadly. She did not bother with the fake nurse persona tonight. There was no sweet voice, no pretense of care. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated malice. "Time for your booster shot, Dominique," she said, walking toward me with a swagger that made my blood boil. "We cannot have you having an episode in court tomorrow, can we? This is a special blend. It will make sure you stay calm, very calm. In fact, you probably will not remember your own name until next Tuesday." I shrank back against the wall, feigning terror. "Please, Ashley," I begged, letting my voice tremble. "I will be good. I promise. Do not give me that. It hurts my head." Ashley laughed, a cold sound that bounced off the padded walls. "It is supposed to hurt," she sneered. "That is how we know it is working. Hold her down." The orderlies rushed in, pinning my arms to my sides. I struggled just enough to make it look real, kicking my legs and whimpering. Ashley stepped forward, uncapping the needle with a flourish. She grabbed my arm roughly, finding a vein with practiced ease. I watched the needle pierce my skin. I watched her thumb press the plunger down, sending the liquid into my bloodstream. I squeezed my eyes shut and waited. If LaToya had failed, this was the end. If she had not managed to swap the vials in the prep room, I would be brain dead in 10 minutes. Ashley pulled the needle out and tossed it onto the tray. "Sweet dreams, princess," she whispered. "By the time you wake up, everything you own will be ours." I let my head drop forward. I let my body go limp in the orderly's grip. My eyelids fluttered, and I let out a low, groaning breath, sliding down the wall until I was a heap on the floor. Ashley watched me for a moment, kicking my leg with her shoe to check for a reaction. I did not move. Satisfied, she turned and marched out of the room, the orderlies trailing behind her. The heavy door slammed shut and the lock bolted into place. I lay on the floor for a full minute, listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I opened my eyes. They were clear. My mind was sharp. There was no fog, no heaviness, no encroaching darkness. I felt a surge of energy that had nothing to do with adrenaline. LaToya had done it. She had swapped the high-dose antipsychotic for a high dose of vitamin B complex and saline. Ashley thought she had just chemically lobotomized me. In reality, she had just given me the energy boost I needed to destroy her. I sat up and stretched my limbs, feeling stronger than I had in months. Let them think I was broken. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom and show them exactly what a healthy, angry black woman could do. The double doors of the Fulton County Superior Court swung open with a heavy groan that echoed like a sealing tomb. I was slumped in a transport wheelchair, my head lolling against my chest, my hands resting limply in my lap. To the bailiff standing guard and the court reporter adjusting her glasses, I looked like a woman who had completely detached from reality. I was wearing a plain gray dress that Ashley had picked out for me. It was 2 sizes too big, hanging off my gaunt frame like a shroud, designed to make me look small, frail, and utterly defeated. But beneath the fabric, my muscles were tense and ready. The saline injection Latoya had given me earlier was coursing through my veins, keeping my mind razor sharp. I was not a passenger in this chair. I was a soldier inside a tank waiting for the signal to open fire. Darnell was the one pushing me. He walked with a slow, somber gait, playing the role of the devoted husband burdened by tragedy. I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the faint metallic scent of fear. He was nervous, but he was hiding it well behind a mask of sorrow. He guided me to the plaintiff table and locked the wheels of the chair with a loud click. He leaned down and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. It took every ounce of my willpower not to bite his hand. "You are doing great, Dom," he whispered, his voice trembling with fake emotion. "Just sit there and let me save you." Judge Harrison entered the room, and the bailiff bellowed, "All rise." Darnell stood up immediately, buttoning his suit jacket with respectful precision. I remained seated, staring blankly at the wood grain of the table. The judge looked down at me from his high bench, his expression softening into pity. He saw exactly what Darnell wanted him to see: a broken woman, a tragedy. He did not see the predator lurking behind my glazed eyes. "Your Honor," Darnell began, his voice thick with unshed tears, "I stand before you today with a heavy heart. My wife Dominique has always been a vibrant, intelligent woman, but over the last 6 months, I have watched the woman I love disappear into the darkness of severe schizophrenia. She has become violent toward herself and others. She has burned through our savings during manic episodes. She is no longer capable of making decisions for her own safety." Darnell paused, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. The courtroom was silent, captivated by his performance. He was painting a masterpiece of lies. "I am asking the court to grant me permanent conservatorship over her person and her estate, not because I want control, but because I made a vow, in sickness and in health. I just want to bring my wife home and get her the help she desperately needs. Please, Your Honor, do not let her hurt herself anymore." I listened to every word, cataloging his lies like entries in a fraudulent ledger. He was good. He was very good. He had the judge nodding in agreement. He had the gallery looking at him with admiration. He thought he was delivering a eulogy for my freedom. He had no idea he was actually reading his own confession. I kept my head down, watching my own hands. My fingers were still. My breathing was steady. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was snap the jaws shut. The bailiff called Ashley Washington to the stand. She rose from the bench behind Darnell, not with the swagger she displayed at the hospital, but with the reluctant, heavy steps of a professional burdened by a tragic duty. She was dressed in a conservative beige suit that screamed competence and neutrality. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the whole truth while I sat 10 feet away, knowing that every word about to leave her mouth was a calculated perjury. She sat down and adjusted the microphone, looking directly at the judge with wide, earnest eyes. "Mrs. Washington, can you describe the patient's current condition?" the defense attorney asked. Ashley nodded solemnly. "It is heartbreaking, Your Honor. Dominique presents with late-onset paranoid schizophrenia. We have tried every standard protocol. We have tried antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and behavioral therapy, but she is resistant to treatment. In my professional opinion as the head nurse of St. Jude, she is a danger to herself and to the community. Her grip on reality is completely fractured. Just yesterday, she had to be chemically restrained because she was hallucinating that the hospital staff were trying to poison her. I listened to her effortless lies. She was using my very real fear of her poisoning me as proof of my insanity. It was a twisted brilliance that I almost admired. She detailed the forged incidents from the medical logs, speaking with such clinical authority that no one in the room doubted her. She painted a picture of a woman who was gone, leaving behind only a violent shell. When Ashley stepped down, Mama Patrice took her place. If Ashley provided the medical evidence, Mama Patrice provided the emotional anchor. She sat in the witness box clutching a lace handkerchief, dabbing at dry eyes. She did not look at me. She looked at Darnell, who had his head in his hands, feigning despair. "We tried everything, Your Honor," she sobbed, her voice cracking perfectly. "We loved Dominique like our own blood. But that night at dinner, when she attacked my son, when she pulled that knife, I knew we had lost her. I am terrified she is going to kill someone if she is not kept in a secure facility. My poor Darnell has suffered so much, but he refuses to give up on her. He is a saint." Judge Harrison listened intently, his face softening into a mask of deep sympathy. He looked from the weeping mother to the stoic professional sister-in-law and finally to the devoted husband. Then he looked at me. He saw a drooling invalid in a wheelchair, a woman clearly incapable of speaking for herself, let alone managing a multi-million-dollar estate. I could see the decision forming behind his eyes. He believed them. He believed the tears and the charts. The narrative was complete. The trap was shut. The judge cleared his throat and reached for his gavel, ready to sign away my life to the people who had stolen it. I waited for the silence to stretch to its breaking point. I waited until Darnell looked up with a tiny, triumphant smirk. Then I lifted my head. I stopped the act. I locked eyes with the judge and prepared to drop the bomb. Judge Harrison raised the gavel. The dark wood gleamed under the harsh courtroom lights, suspended in the air like the blade of a guillotine. I held my breath, watching the muscle in his forearm tense as he prepared to strike the sounding block. Darnell was already leaning forward, a look of hungry anticipation stretching his features. He was seconds away from total victory. The gavel began its descent. And then the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a sound like a thunderclap. The noise echoed off the high ceilings, causing the judge to freeze mid-strike. Every head in the room turned. Standing in the doorway, framed by the light of the hallway, was not a bailiff or a late spectator. It was a ghost. Archibald Henderson stood there, leaning on an ivory-handled cane, his white hair swept back in a lion-like mane. He was wearing a three-piece charcoal suit that cost more than Darnell's entire wardrobe. Flanking him were 4 junior associates in matching sharp suits, carrying briefcases like weapons of war. They moved into the room with the synchronized precision of a military unit, the sound of their dress shoes clicking against the floor, drowning out the stunned silence. I saw the blood drain from Darnell's face. It happened instantly, leaving him looking gray and sickly. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He leaned over to Mama Patrice, his voice a frantic hiss that carried clearly in the quiet room. "I thought you said he was dead. You told me the old man had a stroke 3 years ago." Mama Patrice looked like she had seen a specter. She clutched her pearls, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land, unable to form a word. Mr. Henderson walked down the center aisle, ignoring the bailiff who tried to step in his path. He did not look at Darnell. He looked only at the judge. "Objection, Your Honor," he boomed, his voice filling the space with the gravelly authority of 50 years in contract law. "I apologize for the interruption, but a grave miscarriage of justice is about to take place in your courtroom." Judge Harrison lowered his gavel slowly, frowning in confusion. "Mr. Henderson," the judge said, recognizing the legendary attorney. "We were under the impression you had passed away. This hearing is a closed matter regarding a conservatorship. I have been retired." "Your Honor, not deceased," Henderson replied, stopping at the defense table. He looked at Darnell with a gaze that could peel paint off a wall. "And I have returned because I am the executor of the Washington Family Trust and the legal guardian of my client estate. The plaintiff has presented a narrative based on forgery, lies, and coercion." Darnell jumped to his feet. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, losing his composure for the first time. "My wife is incompetent. She cannot hire a lawyer. She does not even know where she is. Look at her. She is a vegetable." Mr. Henderson smiled, a slow, terrifying expression that did not reach his eyes. He turned to me. Actually, Mr. Washington, I am not here to defend her. She does not need me to. Your Honor, my client wishes to represent herself. The courtroom gasped. Darnell laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Represent herself. She cannot even speak. Henderson stepped back, clearing the space between me and the bench. I decided it was time. I stopped slouching. I lifted my head. I let the blankness drain from my eyes, replacing it with the sharp, cold intelligence that Darnell feared most. I reached down and unlocked the brakes of the wheelchair. I did not roll it forward. I stood up. I stood up on my own 2 feet, my spine straight, my chin high. I looked Darnell dead in the eye and saw his world crumble. I am perfectly capable of speaking, Darnell, I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing through the silence. And I have a lot to say. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of Darnell's lungs and left the gallery frozen in a state of suspended animation. I placed my hands on the armrests of the cheap transport wheelchair. I did not push myself up with the trembling weakness of an invalid. I rose with the fluid grace of a predator uncoiling from a crouch. My legs, which Darnell had claimed were too weak to carry me, held my weight without a singular quiver. I stood to my full height, appearing to grow 6 inches in a single second. I reached up and swept the hair back from my face, revealing eyes that were burning with a cold, lucid intelligence. The gray hospital dress still hung loosely on my frame, but the way I wore it changed in an instant. I rolled my shoulders back, snapping my spine into perfect alignment. I ran my hands down the front of the fabric, smoothing out the wrinkles with deliberate, precise movements, as if I were straightening a $5,000 Armani suit before a board meeting. I was no longer the frail, broken bird they had dragged in here. I was the hawk, and I had just spotted a field of mice. I turned my head slowly to face the plaintiff table. The color had drained from Darnell's face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under heat. Ashley's mouth was slightly ajar, her professional mask shattered by the impossibility of what she was seeing. She knew exactly what was in that syringe she thought she had administered. She was trying to calculate how I was standing there instead of drooling on the floor. Mama Patrice was clutching her pearls so tightly, I expected the string to snap, scattering jewels across the courtroom floor. I took a step toward them. The click of my heel against the wood floor echoed like a gunshot. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a sharp, dangerous expression that promised total destruction. "Good morning, husband," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room with crystal clear articulation. My tone was laced with a terrifying sweetness. "Are you quite finished with your performance, Darnell? Because I believe the audience is getting bored, and I am ready to start the second act." Darnell stammered, stumbling backward until his legs hit the chair. You are sick," he gasped, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Judge, she is having an episode. This is a manic episode. Restrain her." I did not scream. I did not attack him. I simply laughed, a low, dry sound that silenced him effectively. "Your Honor," I said, turning my attention to the bench. I ignored Darnell, completely treating him like an unruly child. "As you can see, I am fully conscious, I am entirely lucid, and I am very much aware that my husband has just perjured himself 3 times in the last 10 minutes. I walked toward the witness stand, moving with the confidence of a woman who owns the building. I am ready to present my defense, and unlike the fairy tale you just heard, I brought receipts." Mr. Henderson stepped forward and placed a small silver flash drive on the clerk desk with a heavy, deliberate click. "Your Honor," he said, his voice booming, "we would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence. It is a compilation of digital forensic data collected from the defendant home and the medical facility where she was held against her will." The judge nodded and gestured for the clerk to connect the drive to the courtroom main display system. A large screen descended from the ceiling, and the lights in the room dimmed, casting long shadows across Darnell's face. He looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting from the screen to the exit. The screen flickered to life. The first clip was grainy black and white footage taken from a high angle. It was the view from the smoke detector I had installed. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it was the night of the alleged attack. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Darnell stood alone in the living room. I was visible in the corner of the frame, standing perfectly still and calm. Darnell, however, was a whirlwind of activity. He checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, practicing a terrified expression. Then he took a deep breath, clenched his fist, and punched himself violently in the face. The sound of the impact echoed through the courtroom speakers, a sickening crunch of bone on bone. The gallery gasped in unison. On screen, Darnell ripped his own shirt, tearing the buttons off with frantic jerks. He threw himself into the vase, shattering it. Then he picked up the phone and began to scream for help. The contrast between his hysterical voice on the recording and the visual reality of him staging the entire scene was chilling. He was not a victim, he was a director calling action on his own abuse. Before the murmurs in the gallery could subside, the video cut to the next clip. This one was shaky, filmed from a low angle, likely from a phone held at waist height. The setting was unmistakable. The sterile white break room of St. Jude. Darnell and Ashley stood near the vending machine. The audio was crystal clear. Darnell's voice filled the room, dripping with arrogance. "She is a vegetable, Ashley, completely gone. I am selling the mansion for cash next week. Once I pay off the debts in Atlantic City, I am buying that matte black McLaren." Ashley's voice cut in sharp and greedy. "Just make sure I get my cut, Darnell. I risked my license forging those logs. If she wakes up, we are both dead." Darnell laughed on the screen, a sound that was now haunting him. "She is never waking up." Pandemonium broke out. The gallery erupted into shouts of outrage. Mama Patrice slumped in her seat, burying her face in her hands. Ashley went pale, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Darnell jumped to his feet, knocking his chair over. "That is fake," he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "That is AI generated. It is a deep fake." She manipulated the video. I stood calm and motionless in the center of the storm. I turned to the judge, who was staring at the screen with a look of thunderous fury. "As you can see, Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "my husband is not grieving. He is shopping for supercars. And my sister-in-law is not treating patients. She is laundering money. This was not a medical intervention. It was a bank robbery in progress." The courtroom was still buzzing with the shock of the video footage, but I did not give them time to recover. I signaled to Mr. Henderson, who handed me a laser pointer. The screen behind me shifted from the grainy footage of my living room to a sharp, high-contrast spreadsheet. It was a forensic flowchart complex to the uninitiated, but damning to anyone who knew how to read a ledger. This was my domain. I was no longer the victim on the stand. I was the auditor, and Darnell was the failing company. "Your Honor," I said, stepping closer to the screen, my voice projecting with the cool authority of a professor. "The video you just saw proves the method, but this document proves the motive. My husband claimed he petitioned for this conservatorship to protect my assets. The reality is that he needed to liquidate them to save his own life." I pointed the red laser dot at a column of red ink on the left side of the screen. "This is Darnell's personal business account. As you can see, it has been insolvent for 18 months. He has embezzled over $400,000 from his own real estate firm to cover personal expenses. But that was just the appetizer. The main course is right here." I moved the laser to a series of wire transfers labeled Riverboat LLC. Darnell, lawyer, jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant. These are private business dealings." "Overruled," Judge Harrison snapped, leaning forward, his eyes glued to the screen. "Proceed, Mrs. Washington." "Thank you, Your Honor." I continued, tracing the line on the chart. "Riverboat LLC is not a business. It is a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands." I traced the IP addresses and the banking routing numbers. They lead directly to a syndicate operating out of Atlantic City. A syndicate known for high-stakes illegal gambling and loan sharking. I turned to look at Darnell. He was shaking his head mutely, sweat pouring down his temples. The arrogant man who had punched himself in the face was gone, replaced by a man looking into the barrel of a gun. I clicked the remote and the screen zoomed in on a final figure. $2.1 million. That is the current principal Darnell owes to these men. And here's the kicker. I pointed to a date highlighted in yellow. The debt is due in full this coming Monday. If he misses the payment, the interest rate is not financial. It is physical. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The narrative had shifted completely. This was not a domestic tragedy. It was a heist. Darnell did not just want my money because he is greedy, I said, lowering the remote and walking toward the defense table until I was standing right in front of him. He needed access to my trust fund because he is a desperate man with a death sentence hanging over his head. He tried to lock me away in a mental institution, not because I am crazy, but because I am the only person standing between him and a pair of broken legs. He needed to sell my house and liquidate my stocks by Friday to pay off his bookie. I looked up at the judge. This is not a conservatorship case, Your Honor. This is attempted grand larceny and fraud motivated by a $2 million gambling debt. The math does not lie, and neither do I. The financial evidence had stunned the courtroom, but I was not finished. I had dismantled the motive, but now I needed to destroy the method. I walked back to the defense table and picked up a sealed envelope stamped with the logo of the most prestigious toxicology lab in Zurich. This was the result of the package I had secretly mailed to Mr. Henderson weeks ago, a simple lock of hair cut from the nape of my neck before I was dragged to the asylum. I held the envelope up like a holy scripture. Darnell claimed I was sick, I said, my voice low and dangerous. He claimed my mind was breaking. He was half right. My body was breaking, but not because of a mental illness. I handed the report to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. Your Honor, what you are looking at is a segmental hair follicle analysis. Unlike blood or urine, which clears toxins in days, hair keeps a permanent timeline of everything that enters the body. It is a biological receipt, and this receipt shows that for the last 180 days, I have been ingesting a steady low dose of arsenic. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Darnell's face turned the color of ash. Ashley, who had been trying to maintain her professional composure, finally cracked. She gripped the railing of the witness stand, her knuckles white. "That is impossible," she blurted out. "That test is flawed. There must be environmental contamination." I spun around to face her, closing the distance between us until I was standing at the foot of the witness box. "Do not insult the intelligence of this court, Ashley. You are a registered nurse. You know exactly how arsenic works. You know it mimics the symptoms of psychosis. The confusion, the tremors, the paranoia. You relied on the fact that no regular doctor would test for heavy metals in a healthy 30-year-old woman. You treated me for a disease you knew I did not have because you were the one poisoning me." Ashley opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She looked at the judge, then at Darnell, then back at me. Her medical training, which she had used as a shield, was now the very thing convicting her. She knew that the concentration levels in the report could not be accidental. They showed a pattern, a spike every morning after coffee, a drop when Darnell went out of town. It was a chemical diary of attempted murder. Judge Harrison looked up from the report, his face dark with fury. He looked at Ashley with a gaze that stripped away her nursing credentials and left her standing there as a common criminal. "Ms. Washington, do you have an explanation for why a lethal toxin was found in your patient system?" Ashley stammered, looking for a lie that could save her, but the science was a wall she could not climb. "It was just vitamins," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just gave her vitamins. Vitamins do not cause organ failure." "Ashley," I said, cutting her off, "you are not curing me. You are killing me slowly enough to make it look natural, but fast enough to cash out before the audit." I turned back to the judge. "This was not a conservatorship, Your Honor. This was a slow-motion assassination. And they almost got away with it." The judge was reaching for his gavel, ready to issue arrest warrants, but I raised my hand. I was not done. I had dismantled his lies and exposed his crimes, but I wanted to break his spirit. I turned away from the bench and walked slowly toward the defense table. Darnell was slumped in his chair, his eyes unfocused. He was not looking at me or the judge. He was looking at the calendar on the wall. He was counting the hours until Monday. He was thinking about the men from Atlantic City who would not care about a court order when they came to collect their $2 million. "You look like a man walking to the gallows, Darnell," I said softly. My voice was calm, carrying a terrifying intimacy that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "You are not worried about prison, are you? You are worried about Riverboat LLC. You are wondering what happens when you cannot make that payment on Monday. You are wondering if they will break your legs or just put a bullet in your head." Darnell flinched. He looked up at me, sweat dripping from his chin. "You do not know what you have done, Dom," he whispered hoarsely. "They will kill me. They do not care about the law. And if I am dead, you get nothing." I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf standing over a trapped rabbit. "That is where you are wrong, husband. You see, I hate loose ends. So last week, while you were busy staging fake interventions and filming me drooling on myself, I had Mr. Henderson make a phone call. I signaled to my lawyer. Henderson opened a leather folder and pulled out a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper. He slid it across the table until it rested under Darnell, shaking hands. "What is this?" Darnell stammered, staring at the document. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, trying to make sense of the words. "That is a deed of assignment," I explained, enjoying every syllable. "It turns out the syndicate is very pragmatic. They do not care who pays them as long as they get paid. They were quite happy to sell your debt for 50 cents on the dollar to a verified buyer." I leaned in close until I could smell the fear radiating off him. "I used my trust fund, Darnell. The same fund you tried to steal. I used it to buy your debt." Darnell's eyes went wide. He stopped breathing. The realization hit him like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of his lungs. He looked from the paper to me and back again, unable to process the shift in reality. "You do not owe the mob anymore," I said, standing straight and looking down at him like he was a bug under a microscope. "You do not owe the Atlantic City Syndicate a single dime. You owe me." I tapped the paper with my forefinger. "I own your debt, Darnell. $2 million plus interest. Which means legally and financially, I own you. I can seize your assets. I can garnish your future wages. I can foreclose on your life. You wanted to be my conservator. You wanted total control over our finances. Well, congratulations, Darnell. You got your wish. We are tied together forever, but now I am the one holding the leash, and I promise you I will pull it tight." The sound of the gavel striking the wood block was the final note in the symphony of their destruction. Judge Harrison did not mince words. He ordered the immediate arrest of Darnell Washington for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder, and Ashley Washington for medical malpractice and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. The courtroom erupted into chaos, but it was a chaos I watched with the detached calm of a general surveying a won battlefield. 2 bailiffs moved in on Darnell. He did not fight them. He stood up slowly, the fight completely drained from his body. As the metal cuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, only the hollow realization of a man who had gambled his soul and lost. Ashley, however, did not go quietly. She screamed as the female officer twisted her arms behind her back. "I am a medical professional!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "You cannot do this to me. I was just following doctor orders. Check the logs. Check the logs." Her protests were cut short as they dragged her out the side door, her heels scraping uselessly against the floor she used to think she owned. I turned my attention to the last piece on the board. Mama Patrice sat alone on the bench, clutching her handbag, as if it contained the last shreds of her dignity. She looked old suddenly, the gold jewelry around her neck hanging heavy like chains. I walked over to her. She looked up at me, her eyes wet with tears. "How could you?" she whispered. He is your husband. He is a criminal, I corrected her coldly. And you are his accomplice. You knew about the gambling. You knew about the poisoning. You sat at my table and watched me die. I leaned down so only she could hear me. Since I now own Darnell debt, I am calling in all outstanding assets to satisfy the balance. That includes the property put up as collateral. I motioned to Mr. Henderson, who handed her a foreclosure notice. You have 48 hours to vacate your house, Patrice. I suggest you start packing. I am taking everything. I left her weeping on the bench and turned toward the exit. Mr. Henderson gave me a small, respectful nod as I passed. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the courthouse and stepped out onto the marble steps. The air outside was different. It did not smell of medicine or fear or betrayal. It smelled of rain and exhaust and sweet, absolute freedom. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a warm glow on my face. I closed my eyes and took a deep lungful of oxygen, letting it fill the spaces where the anxiety used to live. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was my real phone now, not the cracked burner from the laundry room. I scrolled to a contact I had saved months ago before the darkness had fully descended. I pressed call. Hello, came the gruff voice of the contractor on the other end. Mrs. Washington, we were scheduled to start the pool renovation next week. I looked out at the skyline of Atlanta, a city that was finally mine again. Change of plans. I said, my voice steady and light. I do not want a renovation. I want you to bring the bulldozers. There was a confused pause. For the pool, ma'am. No, I said, smiling as I walked down the steps toward my new life. For the house. Tear it all down, every brick, every beam, every memory. I want it gone. I am building something new on the ashes. The most profound lesson from Dominique's journey is that your intuition is a survival instinct that must never be ignored, especially when it whispers that something is wrong. We often equate love with blind trust, but this story serves as a brutal reminder that trust must be earned and verified every single day. Dominique was stripped of her physical strength and her legal rights, but she triumphed because she protected her mind and leveraged her professional skills as a weapon. It teaches us that financial independence is not just about luxury, it is about safety and the ability to walk away when the table turns against you. We learned that gaslighting is a powerful tool of control, but the truth documented and preserved is the ultimate antidote. No matter how deep the hole is or how many enemies surround you, there is always a way out. If you stay calm, calculate your moves, and refuse to let others write your ending. Do not underestimate the quiet observer, because while the loud ones are bragging, the smart ones are building a case. If you felt the satisfaction of justice being served, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories where the underdog bites back.